Well, greetings, people of the internet. Unky Joe here, Unky Joe's Playhouse. Today, we're going to do it. All the parts are here. We're going to upgrade or downgrade or just change our winraid server. So today our goal is to remove the Asus X570P, is it X570P motherboard? The AMD? Yeah, and replace it with this motherboard, the B450M DS3H version 2. That's a cotton pick a mouthful. I got this off of Amazon warehouse deal. They assure me that it is a working motherboard. So the goal of today is to replace that motherboard in the winraid server and then to get everything back up and running. As you know, we run our surveillance, BlueIris on there, we run Plex on there, and we run Emby on there as well. And we use Drive Bender to set up a drive array. Now, the CPU in this unit is supposed to be a Ryzen 5 1600, but for whatever reason, this Asus motherboard that was in it identifies it as a Ryzen 5 2600. So we're going to find out today what's going on with that. Let's get the video started right now. Now, I'll be honest with you and share a little secret. I love building computers. I really do. I get no better gratification than, putting some parts together, assembling a PC. So, I thought I'd share that process with you. Now, in this case, I have the Asus motherboard in there, the X570, and I had a subscriber offer me a good price for that, so I went ahead and sold it to them. So that meant I needed to disassemble winraid. Now, one of the problems with the winraid servers, I was never happy with that board in there because, as you can see, it's a full-size ATX motherboard. And with that drive bay, that four drive bay, it kind of pushes back onto the motherboard. And I was just afraid over time that might, cause some damage. So I went with a mini ITX board. It's the one I got off of Amazon to replace this one. And of course, all of these motherboards have 1,000 screws in them, and so getting it out of there is always fun. And there we go. I've got it on the bench now, so I'm going to remove the fan, get the CPU off the board so I can move forward with putting the new motherboard in. Always be careful with these AMD chips. It's real easy to bend those pins, and speaking from experience, I've done that before, and it's kind of scary relining the pins up. So here's the new board I'm going to be putting in there. Taking off the little AMD bracket, putting the CPU back in. It's a Ryzen 5 2600, and then I'm cleaning off the chip just to verify that that is a Ryzen 5 1600, and it is, or 2600, sorry. And then getting ready to put some thermal compound on there, and here's another shot of that. Man, I'm glad I went ahead and got these overhead camera and the bench camera set up. Just makes it so much more versatile when I'm trying to do these videos. And you can see I left the paste on from the old CPU cooler. So I'm cleaning that off, and you will clearly see it is a Ryzen 5 processor. Or a Ryzen processor, I should say. So here I was cleaning the fan, getting it ready to go. Be glad I sped the footage up. Now, I only put a pea-size bit of thermal compound on there, just what works for me. I've never had any trouble doing it that way. Now what I want to do is, I don't have a bench power supply right now, so I took this power supply out so I can put it on the bench and test the board, do the BIOS updates and all that good stuff outside of the computer case. Just, I don't want to introduce that as a possible problem for the system. So I put the RAM in, and this board supports dual channel RAM, so that's a good thing. And then of course you go to fire it up and make sure everything's working okay with all the components that are going to be in it. It's just a habit I've done. Now you'll watch when I spin up the CPU, or the CPU fan starts up. Keep an eye on that power supply fan. No movement whatsoever. So I had everything, and here I was running some burn-in tests, running some Unigen benchmarks. But all the time I had this power supply in that case, all that stuff crammed in there, and no cooling on that power supply. So now it's showing me disassembling the power supply. Now, don't go putting your hands into a power supply if you don't know what you're doing, if you haven't done it before. Those large capacitors in there can store a voltage charge for quite a while. You could get a nasty shock. So if you don't know what you're doing, keep your hands out of your power supply. But you know me, I'm the king of cheap, and I didn't want to replace the entire power supply when I can just put a new fan in it. And these are good power supplies. They're basic Entech 450 watt power supplies. So even though they got a little warm, they can take the heat. They're made with quality components, and I did check everything inside the power supply. And yes, I did solder the wires. Now, the soldering iron I have here, the pencil soldering iron, is my old soldering iron. My spouse bought me a whole new temperature-controlled soldering kit that I totally forgot about. But I am going to be repairing it, some more things on the bench, so I do have it out now. But I use this temporary one to do it, and then there's me cutting my heat shrink tubing. The other thing I don't have is a heat gun. I just use a lighter to melt those heat shrink tubing. But this is me, of course, installing the new fan and soldering the connection so we have a good electrical connection, and then putting heat shrink tubing over it so nothing shorts out. You cannot be too careful with your power supplies. As I put an open flame on the wires. So the other thing I had a problem with is putting this damn thing back together, because I don't have the dexterity y'all have in your hands. I have nerve damage in my hands from a disc in my neck that's compressed, and so I cannot feel the tips of my fingers sometimes, so it makes it real hard to feel. I used to be an auto mechanic as well, and you feel your way around to put screws and bolts in and that kind of thing. It just becomes a second or sixth sense, as they say. So I had a little trouble getting the cover back on, but eventually I worked it out, and as you'll see hopefully here in a couple of minutes, the power supply repair was successful. So I hooked it back up to the motherboard so I could continue on with my testing. That SSD drive is not the drive that ended up going in there. I ended up having to get an NVMe drive. There we go. Now the fan is spinning. And these were fairly well-rated fans on Amazon. So now here I am reassembling everything, getting it all back together, and ready for its finale, or to put it back up and running. So, and it was at this point I decided, well, since I'm putting an NVMe drive in there, I might as well load Windows from scratch, which is what I did. I put Windows 10 Pro back on there. Now here's getting the drive cage, the power connections connected up. But I just decided it'd be better just to do a clean install of Windows 10, install everything from scratch. And if you've seen my video before on Plex and Emby and on BlueIris, you'll know I've shown you all how to back that up, and so it's a trivial process to restore the data onto the system. So there's a new motherboard going in, and I had to be careful because this is a mini ITX or mini ATX motherboard. I had to make sure I had the standoffs in the right place. You don't want to put a standoff somewhere under that board where you might short something out. And then of course I had to go find my standoffs because it's not something I deal with on a regular basis. So there I am, putting the standoffs in and getting the board aligned and getting everything configured. I do like the fact that I do like this thermal take case, even though it's a cheapy creepy case. It's got a lot of room in it, as long as you use a mini ATX motherboard. But you can see all the drive bays that thing has in it, 3.5 inch, 2.5 inch. So it's a, you know, it's kind of cheaply made. The metal on it is kind of cheap, but hey, you know, for 30 or 40 bucks, which I think is what I paid for this case a couple of years ago, beggars can't be choosers, right? And it gets the job done. And once you get the whole thing assembled, get the covers on it, it's nice to have a fairly lightweight machine. So now, while I was rebuilding this unit, I transferred all the functions, Emby, Plex, and the BlueIris over to my Dell R720 rack unit. I have a kind of a mirror image of the software that's on this winraid server, as I call it, so that in a moment's notice I could flip a switch over to the Dell, which I don't leave running 24/7 unless I'm using it, you know, unless I've got winraid tied up for something else. Now, full bore, this machine is using about 120 watts at full bore, but it sits around 80 watts when it's just running the surveillance software. But when we start, you know, watching live TV on Plex or Emby or playing a video, then the video card kicks in and uses a bit more wattage. So, but it is cheaper to run something like this than it is to run one of the enterprise level servers that I have, one of the many that I have in my rack. So now, unfortunately, I didn't save any more of the build footage, but I do have some shots of the completed unit coming up. But this is pretty much it, the end of the build. You know, kind of boring anyway, huh? But there's winraid and its new motherboard. Alright, so let's go over the specs of the winraid server. So, as you can see, it's got a Ryzen 5 2600 6-core CPU in there. BlueIris is taking up most of the CPU and memory. But I also have Plex and Emby running on here. And it's handling the load quite well. We've been testing it now for, let's see, about 4 days, 20 hours, 49 minutes, and 37 seconds. So, been running well. Our memory is stabilized at about 7 gig in use. Here's our hard drive activity. Now, the only thing I have these hard drives set up to do, and these are 4 2-terabyte drives, I believe. Yeah, 4 2-terabyte drives, and they're just in a drive vendor drive array, and I strictly have them in there for the surveillance video to record onto. I'm not storing anything else on there at this time. As you can see, our Ethernet activity is right around 40 megabits, not megabytes, per second for the video for the surveillance cameras. And then we got a Radeon RX 560 series card in here. that is strictly devoted to Plex and Emby. So far, so good. No issues with this unit whatsoever, and I'm hoping it'll stay that way. We did discover that it actually is a Ryzen 5 2600 processor, so thank you, Amazon, for sending me the wrong processor all those years ago when I ordered a Ryzen 5 1600. It could have just been they were out, but anyway, yeah, so all is good. That new motherboard is working very well, and so far I'm pleased with the performance of the system. So yeah, I'm really happy with this board. It turned out to be a really good idea to get this motherboard. I'm very, very happy with it so far. And the other thing we discovered is that evidently when I ordered my Ryzen 5 1600 processor and I went back on Amazon and verified that purchase, that they were either out of stock on it, or perhaps it was during the time when the new Ryzen 5 2600s came out, or perhaps someone at Amazon just made a mistake. They actually sent me a Ryzen 5 2600 CPU, because when I took the thermal compound off, lo and behold, there it said Ryzen 5 2600, and it's working. It's working fine, as you can see. The other thing we discovered is I had a bad power supply fan in there. So I don't know how long that fan had been seized up, and it was seized up. In fact, I have the fan right here, as you can see. Yeah, look, it's leaving an indentation on my finger just trying to turn it. So I ordered some new fans off of Amazon and replaced it, as you saw in the video, and it also gave me a chance to use actually, I'm using my old soldering iron, but it gave me a chance to break out. I forgot my spouse had bought me a brand new soldering station for Christmas. I just have never had a use for or a need to use it, but I actually used it in this video to actually solder the wires together for the new fan. And we got it up and running, and now the CPU is cooling, or now the fan power supply is cooling. It's back down on the floor where it needs to be. Now, I opted to go ahead and do a clean install of Windows on this, a clean install of everything, because the other thing I did was put an NVMe drive in here, because this motherboard only has 4 SATA ports on it, and I needed those SATA ports for the 4 spinning hard drives that are in here. So I went ahead and purchased an NVMe drive. I think I got a Kingston NVMe for about 50 bucks. It's a 250 gig, and that's perfectly fine for the operating system. And then I set up Drive Bender, 4 drives in Drive Bender. I think they're all 2 terabyte drives, and that's what I'm recording my surveillance video to. So it's up and running, it's working well. And then we also have the AMD RX 560 video card in this unit for Plex and Emby transcoding, and it's working fine. I'm very happy. It was money well spent. The motherboard worked well out of the box, didn't have any issues with it, and I was able to sell the Asus board to a subscriber of the channel for a good price, and that'll be on its way Monday afternoon. So there you go, fine people of the internet. We hope you found the video entertaining and informative. As always, please give us a thumbs up down below if you liked the video. Leave your comments down in the comments section. Subscribe if you're not already a subscriber on YouTube. And if you're inclined to donate, we take PayPal, Patreon, and the YouTube join function. So for $2 a month, automatic payment, you don't even have to think about it. It goes a long way to supporting this channel and our endeavors here. So thanks again for coming to see us, and please don't forget, we'll see you on the other side.